Hi and welcome back. And this is going to be our final basic CSS tutorial before we get back into the Manchester project and formatting that. And in this video I want to talk about using CSS to position different elements. Now there are a number of different types of positioning that you can work with in CSS. And you're going to hear and read terms like absolute positioning, relative positioning, static positioning, fixed positioning, and all these different positioning types have an important role to play in CSS. There's also something called normal flow or normal positioning, and that's just the default way that the browser displays information on a page. Something that goes along with normal positioning is a type of positioning called floating or float positioning. And it's a very popular way to position different page elements with CSS. And that's going to be specifically what we're going to focus on in this video and what we're going to use for the Manchester and Krakow projects. Now, taking a look at our index page here, you can see that I've added some material here. And you can type in this material, or if you've downloaded the course materials, there's an item called HTML test pages that has a page that looks like this that you can use. And you can see here I've actually created 4 different areas. I've created my banner area, my navigation area, my content area, and I actually left an extra line in there, I'll take that out, and then my footer area. And each one of those areas, just like we did in our project, we've set up in its own div or in its own division. And if we go ahead and look at this in Chrome, you can see the way this is going to look. Just one element flowing after another. Now, there are a few things that we want to do with this page to make it look a little bit more like a traditional web page. The first thing that I want to do is I want to contain all of this information into a specific area in the center of the page. I don't want it to go from left to right. And then I want to have the navigation section be to the left of the content area. So in effect, I want to move all of this content up into this area right here. And then we have our footer down here at the bottom. And we're also going to play a little bit with margins and padding just to make sure that that everything looks okay. And I think everybody here has seen an example web page before. It's extremely common where you have a banner up top, a left-hand navigation area, and then to the right of that the main content area, and a footer at the bottom. Very, very common way of laying out pages. So again, you can type this information in, and again, these are just nonsense sentences here. This is actually called lorem ipsum text. It's filler text. And if you type in lorem ipsum into Google, you'll find there's a lot of sites out there that you can copy and paste this text as filler. And that can be really helpful when you're trying to initially create a design. Now, one thing that we haven't done up to this point is to work with what's called a wrapper div. And a wrapper div is a div that contains all of the other divs on our page. And to create a wrapper div, all you do is create a div and give it an ID. I call it wrapper. A lot of people call it wrapper. And then contain all the different parts of your page inside of that wrapper div. So you can see banner, nav, content, and footer are now contained inside of this div that I've given the ID of wrapper. And again, I could call this Bob if I wanted to. Wrapper is just, it makes sense and a lot of people use it. But we can call it Bob or whatever you wanted to. And I'm going to use Bob to center the content on the page and also specify the width. And remember, when we're targeting an ID like Bob, we always use the number sign. So number sign Bob, and I've deleted all my old styles except for my universal selector that removes the margin, padding, and border there. And the first thing I want to do is I want to set the width that my whole page is going to be contained inside of. And I'm going to go ahead and say my whole web page should be 900 pixels wide. And save that. And now when we go take a look at this in Chrome again, you can see that it no longer goes edge to edge. It now just takes up 900 pixels worth of space. Now, a lot of people will use widths other than 900. 960, 1000 pixels, and 1140 are very common widths for web pages. Now, a lot of people stick with 900 pixels the way I do for one very simple reason, and that's tablets. Most tablets will display a 900 or 960 pixel width page layout much better than they will a layout that's specified for 1200 or 1300. So if you're concerned about tablets, setting your width for 900 and 960 will give you probably the best results at this point in time. Even though monitors now, or I should say desktop monitors, have much more space available to them, tablets still kind of restrict us on that. There is a way to specify the type of device or the device resolution and give that device a different width. For instance, you could, if somebody's looking at your website on a desktop monitor that has a resolution of 1920 by 1080, you could specify that the width is 1400 pixels or 1600 pixels. But then if somebody else comes along and looks at your page on a tablet, it narrows everything down to 900 pixels or something around that way. Or if somebody looks at your web page on a smartphone, it makes it even smaller. That's called responsive design. Responsive design. And it basically entails making a different CSS style sheet for every resolution that you want to target. I'm sort of simplifying that at this point, but if you're interested in that, the general topic that you should be researching is responsive design, and eventually we'll have some tutorials on that. But for what we're doing right now, we're not going to worry about making our website responsive, and most websites are not responsive as at this point. So you can see the way this is laid out and now constrained into 900 pixels. Now, the next thing we want to do is we actually want to center it on the page, and actually I want to give this a little bit of padding on the top so that my banner isn't right up against the edge of my page. So we want to set some top and bottom and some left and right margin spacing here. So I'm going to come in to Bob, which is our wrapper, and I'm going to go ahead and set the margin. Now, the top and the bottom margins, I just want to be 20 pixels. But the left and the right margin for our page. And you can see I've now got some spacing up here at the top. The left and the right margin space, I want to be equal. And since if the left and the right margin space is equal, that will center the content on the page for me. And the way you do that is simply by typing in auto for left and right. So we've got 20 pixels top and bottom, and auto for left and right. And let's save that. And now let's go ahead and take a look at it in Chrome. And you can see we've now centered this on the page, and I have 20 pixels top and bottom. Can't see it on the bottom because of the screen resolution, but it is there. I also want you to notice that before we set the margin, we couldn't see these bullets here. And going back to the last class, remember I said because we took the margin and the paddings off and we made it 0, the bullets were actually there. They were just off the screen. Here's an example of that. And again, if I wanted to remove those bullets, I could simply go into my ULLIs and specify list style type none. So that's one reason why it's important to always do this for your navigation elements, even if you don't see it, see them on the page, because they will be there unless you take them off. So now what we're going to do is we want this element here to float to the left hand side of the page and this element to float up next to it. So I'm going to go ahead, and again we are calling this div here nav. So I'm going to go ahead and create a style for my nav div, and I want to float that to the left. So that's going to float to the left of everything on my page. We'll save that, and we'll preview this in our browser again. And now you can see, yes, this is floated to the left of everything on my page. Everything else is floated up around it. Now, this obviously isn't really what we were looking for. What we were looking for is to have something that looks like we have two columns, one for the navigation and one for the content. So what I want to do is I want to specify the width of my nav and put some left-hand margin on my content region. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to specify the width of my nav area to being 150 pixels wide. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a style for my content div, and I'm going to say that should have a left-hand margin of 150 pixels. We'll save that. Go ahead and come back in here and look at this in Chrome, and now you can see how we now have what looks like two columns. We have a 200 pixel wide, or I'm sorry, 150 pixel wide navigation area, and everything in the content area has been pushed over to simulate those two columns. And you can even see as I highlight this material here, you can see the way that's floating there. And then if we were to be actually setting this up, I might come in here and create a style for banner, and I might put some top and some bottom padding on there. In this case it could be padding or margin. I'm going to say 20 pixels of padding top and bottom, 0 left and right. I could do the same thing with the footer. I can give myself 20 pixels of padding, top and bottom, and 0 pixels left and right. And now let's go ahead and preview this. And you can see now I have that spacing on here. And there's actually more than 20 pixels of padding above my banner. There's actually 40 pixels of padding there. And that's, I shouldn't say 40 pixels of padding. What there is there's 20 pixels of margin space on the wrapper. And then there's 20 pixels of padding on the banner. Now, one last thing that I want to call your attention to in this video is the difference between margin and padding. And when we talked about the box model properties and introduced margin and padding, I mentioned that margin is on the outside of an element, whereas padding is on the inside of an element. And oftentimes that's really confusing to understand, but this will give us a chance to very simply illustrate this. For my banner area, I have 20 pixels of padding top and bottom and 0 pixels left and right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a background color to my banner. And we'll just make it this light orange color. And I'm going to save it. Remember, padding is on the inside of an element. And when I come here and preview this in Chrome, you can see that I now have that orange color. I want you to notice that the orange color fills the entire area of the banner, including the 20 pixels on the top and the bottom, because that's padding. It's on the inside of the element. Watch what happens if I change the padding to margin. Now I've got 20 pixels of margin top and bottom. And let's go back in here and preview this in Chrome. Now you can see that just the element itself is filled in with that color. The margin area, since it's outside of the element, doesn't take the background color. It's outside of the element. And that's a very important distinction of between margin and padding. Now, a lot of times it does not matter whether you use border or whether you use margin or padding. For example, in this case, when we weren't applying a background to the banner, margin and padding effectively did the same thing. But when we did add the background color, there was a minor difference in the spacing up in the top, but generally they did the same thing. But when we added the background color, you notice that something very, very different happened. You could also combine the two. I could put 20 pixels of margin, and then I could also put 20 pixels of padding, top and bottom, onto that element. And now you'll see there's the margin space and there's the padding space. So setting the background color can often be helpful in just understanding the difference between margin and padding. This is also an example of how Dreamweaver's design view or layout view can help you understand the way different elements are being positioned on the page. I'm going to come in here to design view, and you can see right off the back the different divs on my page now have dotted lines around them. So that's very helpful to see where my different divs begin and end. For example, this is the banner div, This is the content div, the nav div, and the footer div down here at the bottom. If I click on the dotted line, Dreamweaver is actually going to bring up some visual aids that will assist me in seeing where my different what my different spacing is. You can notice this area right in here. Well, that represents the actual element itself. But then above and below that, you're going to notice this thin crosshatch, this thin right-hand crosshatch. That represents the padding. And if you actually hover over that, it's actually going to tell you what it is. You'll see the little yellow tooltip here that appears and disappears. Tells you that that's 20 pixels of padding. Well, then we have the crosshatch down here. That's actually the margin spacing. That's actually the margin spacing. So Dreamweaver's design view is very helpful for understanding the layout of your page. And again, on these elements, if I click the content div right here, remember I put 150 pixels of margin, left-hand margin, onto that area. So it bumps it past my navigation. And you can see that left-hand crosshatch, or I'm sorry, right-hand crosshatch. And when I hover over it, it gives me that little tooltip that tells me how much is there. If I was to come into my content area, and let's say apply some, not some top and bottom padding, but some left and right padding, I could say padding 0, 20 pixels, and save that. And now when I come in here, you'll see there's that little bit of extra space, and you can see the crosshatch is different. But again, I get that little yellow tooltip that tells me what that particular spacing is. So design view really is helpful in understanding how the different elements on your page are laid out. But it's definitely not a substitute for previewing your site in a browser. And we'll talk more about that as we deal with the Manchester design. In the next video, we actually are going to get back to our Manchester project, and we're going to apply all the things that we've learned about CSS to our Manchester project. So all of your patience in waiting through all this preliminary learning is about to pay off as we really start to see our Manchester project come to life and take shape. So I'll see you in the next video.